We have stopped the procurement of goods from U.S. companies. We have a package of retaliation that's prepared to be deployed. That's about $125 billion worth of goods.
I'm going to take the oranges instead of the apples because they're from Spain. So good for EU, good for Mexico, too bad for the U.S.
If you still believe American brands hold an unshakable position in Canada, long seen as America's closest economic ally, then it's time to think again. Not for sale, say Canadian voices. We have our own country, our own pride. We won't be annexed. That message is now showing up where it hurts most at the cash register. Across the country, Canadians are quietly but powerfully turning their backs on American products. From Walmart to McDonald's, the decline is sharp. Sales are plummeting, locations are closing, and once billion-dollar brands are suddenly scrambling for financial survival. What's even more shocking, most people didn't even notice it was happening. In this video, we'll expose the 5 iconic American companies now facing collapse in Canada, and what their downfall reveals about a growing rift between two nations once economically inseparable. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to Huge Battle for more untold global stories just like this one. McDonald's. For generations, McDonald's wasn't just a fast food chain in Canada, it was a cultural fixture. Over 1,400 locations dotted every major city and small town, making the iconic Golden Arches feel as familiar as the Canadian flag itself. In the 1990s and early 2000s, 13% of the entire quick-service food market belonged to McDonald's, according to data from the NPD Group. It was where children held birthday parties, teens grabbed fries after school, and grandparents found comfort in a familiar coffee. But in the past 2 years, that long-standing loyalty has quietly dissolved. Since mid-2023, McDonald's Canada has seen a 12% drop in national revenue, with Quebec alone posting a steep 19% decline according to internal earnings reports obtained by the Financial Post. Once thriving locations in downtown Montreal and Vancouver have been shuttered or forced to scale back hours. And perhaps most alarming, no one is talking about it. Customers aren't protesting or petitioning, they're simply not showing up. Why? Because what once felt like comfort food now feels like a corporate relic. Across Canada's younger generations, especially Gen Z, the perception of McDonald's has shifted dramatically. According to a 2024 Ledger survey, 58% of Canadian Gen Z respondents said they actively avoid McDonald's, citing concerns over health sustainability and brand authenticity. For them, the chain is no longer nostalgic, it's generic, overprocessed, disconnected. One 42-year-old father in Toronto who grew up visiting McDonald's every Sunday with his own father put it this way: "It used to be a treat, something fun, something to look forward to, but now I look at the menu and I feel nothing. I don't want to feed this to my kid. It doesn't feel like a memory anymore. It just feels like a habit I'm trying to break." What happened? McDonald's pursuit of efficiency and global expansion led to exactly what once made it powerful familiarity becoming its greatest liability. As the company leaned into automation, cost-cutting, and uniformity, it began to feel increasingly inhuman. Where Canadian consumers once saw fast and familiar, they now see a faceless food machine that's lost touch with local values. This is a generation asking, where does this beef come from? How much sodium is in this meal? What's the environmental cost of this packaging? And McDonald's, despite rolling out limited-time vegan options or launching sleek new self-serve kiosks, has failed to offer real answers. To many, it seems more concerned with cutting payroll than rebuilding trust, more focused on margins than meaning. Even worse, its cultural image, once deeply integrated into everyday Canadian life, has faded. The once endearing Ronald McDonald has vanished from marketing. Community outreach has been replaced by in-app coupons and cold loyalty points. And in a marketplace where consumers crave connection, McDonald's feels increasingly foreign. This disconnection runs deeper than taste, it touches identity. For older Canadians, McDonald's was once a thread in the fabric of their upbringing. For newer generations, it's a symbol of a time when people didn't ask questions, when health, ethics, and community didn't matter as much. But times have changed. Now the silence in the dining rooms and the empty drive-through lanes speak volumes. Customers haven't declared war on McDonald's. They've simply moved on. Local brands like A&W Freshie and independent burger shops that offer grass-fed meat, plant-based alternatives, and compostable packaging are thriving. Why? Because they offer more than food. They offer values, transparency, a sense of community. McDonald's still dominates in global revenue, but dominance means nothing without trust. And trust once lost is almost impossible to regain. This isn't just a business slump, it's a cultural unraveling. When a brand that defined youth family and belonging for decades becomes irrelevant in its closest market, that's not just a missed opportunity, it's a warning, a mirror. If Canadians no longer see themselves in McDonald's, how long before Americans feel the same? The arches are still golden, but the meaning behind them is fading fast. Kraft Heinz. For decades, Kraft Heinz products were staples in nearly every Canadian kitchen. Whether it was the unmistakable orange glow of Kraft Dinner or the comforting familiarity of Heinz ketchup, these brands symbolized convenience, comfort, and trust. In fact, by 2020, over 80% of Canadian households regularly stocked at least one Kraft or Heinz product, according to Nielsen data. But today, those same iconic products are being quietly pushed aside. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, Kraft Heinz's revenue in Canada dropped by 6.2% as revealed in the company's latest earnings report. That decline didn't come from inflation or supply chain delays, it came from a loss of trust. Canadian shoppers are no longer reaching for the boxed dinners and plastic bottles they once grew up with. Instead, they're choosing local, organic, and transparent alternatives. And it's not hard to see why. In grocery aisles across Toronto, Vancouver, and Halifax, Kraft Heinz products are slowly being relocated from eye level to bottom shelves. Taking their place are Canadian-owned brands offering no preservatives, non-GMO, and locally sourced labels. Chains like Loblaws and Sobeys have increased shelf space for President's Choice Organics, Annie's homegrown and smaller regional brands. These aren't just aesthetic changes, they're reflections of a new Canadian consumer mentality. The shift isn't purely nutritional, it's emotional. The 2015 merger that created Kraft Heinz might have made financial sense, but it alienated the company's Canadian fanbase. One of the most symbolic ruptures came with the closure of the Heinz factory in Leamington, Ontario, once dubbed the tomato capital of Canada. The plant's shutdown eliminated hundreds of jobs and marked the beginning of a supply chain shift from Canadian farms to U.S. and Mexican operations. That decision sparked outrage. It wasn't just about economics, it was about identity. When the ketchup that sat on every family table suddenly stopped being made with local tomatoes, Canadians noticed. They felt abandoned, replaced, devalued. A 71-year-old woman in Winnipeg captured the sentiment in an interview with Global News. "I made Kraft Dinner every week. My husband loved it. But then my daughter showed me the label. All these additives, preservatives, and names I couldn't pronounce. Why do I need chemicals in something so simple?" Her story isn't unique. Canadians, especially younger generations and health-conscious families, are scrutinizing their food like never before. They read labels. They research ingredients. They ask, where was this made? What's in it? Who profits from it? And Kraft Heinz, with its sprawling industrial footprint and corporate mergers, increasingly feels like the wrong answer to those questions. In many ways, Kraft Heinz represents a fading era, an era when brand recognition was more important than ingredient transparency, when trust was inherited, not earned, when nostalgia overruled scrutiny. But that era is ending. Even in the US, consumers are shifting toward cleaner, simpler brands. But in Canada, the shift is even sharper, fueled not only by health concerns, but by economic nationalism. After years of feeling like a convenient market for American expansion, Canadians are reclaiming their plates. In fact, a 2024 survey from Abacus Data showed that 61% of Canadians under 40 actively avoid food brands associated with US corporate takeovers or factory closures in Canada. This is no longer about taste, it's about values. And Kraft Heinz, for all its legacy and global recognition, is now seen as out of touch with those values. It's not just the factory closures, or the preservatives, or the job losses. It's the collective realization that convenience shouldn't come at the cost of community. That food isn't just fuel, it's identity, memory, and trust. Kraft Heinz can still recover, but not through another rebranding campaign or a new low-fat product line. The only path forward is genuine reconnection with local suppliers, ethical sourcing, and communities that once saw these products as part of their daily lives. Until then, a growing number of Canadians will continue to pass by the iconic Kraft dinner box without a second glance. Not with anger, not with protest, just with a quiet decision that says, we've moved on. Coca-Cola. For more than a century, Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink. It was a feeling. A red can of Coke meant summer afternoons, holiday dinners, late-night snacks, and memories of simpler times. In Canada, as in the United States, it stood as a symbol of American optimism and indulgence. Coca-Cola once commanded over 50% of the Canadian soft drink market, with production supported by 6 major bottling facilities across the country. But today, the red can sits quietly on the shelf, unopened, unwanted, and increasingly irrelevant. According to Coca-Cola's internal 2024 market report, the company lost 9% market share in Canada, with its flagship product declining in unit sales by over 11% year over year. This isn't a minor setback, it's a warning bell. In a country that once celebrated Coca-Cola's ubiquity, shoppers are now choosing anything but. The shift is starkest among Gen Z and millennials. A 2024 consumer behavior study by Environics Research found that 62% of Canadians aged 18 to 39 no longer consider Coca-Cola their default beverage, and 47% actively avoid traditional sodas altogether. The reasons are clear: too sweet, too processed, too corporate. Walk through a grocery store in Toronto or Ottawa, and you'll see it. Kombucha, sparkling herbal waters, infused mineral drinks, and artisanal sodas are crowding out Coca-Cola's once dominant shelf space. Retailers like Whole Foods Canada and Farm Boy have expanded offerings of small-batch Canadian beverages brands that promote sustainability, local sourcing, and lower sugar content. Coca-Cola's attempts to respond have felt out of touch. Diet Coke, Coke Zero, and Coke No Sugar are still loaded with chemicals and artificial sweeteners that today's health-conscious shoppers reject. For younger Canadians, the issue isn't just calories, it's trust. They're not asking for less sugar. They're asking for more transparency, authenticity, and purpose. That's where Coca-Cola is failing. A 61-year-old veteran in Michigan shared this reflection in a CBC interview. "When I was in the service, a cold Coke was worth more than gold. I still keep a few in the fridge, not to drink, but as a reminder of what life used to feel like. My grandkids, they won't touch the stuff. They say it tastes like chemicals." That generational divide tells the entire story. Coca-Cola's appeal was built on nostalgia, but nostalgia only works if the next generation buys into it. And today's consumers aren't interested in remembering, they're interested in redefining. Coca-Cola was once loved because it didn't change. That consistency, that flavor, that brand recognition, it was a promise. But in today's world, not changing is the problem. Consumers are demanding brands that evolve with the times, brands that not only listen but lead. Brands that use recyclable materials, minimize carbon footprints, support ethical sourcing, and promote wellness. Coca-Cola, despite marketing buzzwords and greenwashing attempts, is seen as lagging behind. And the damage isn't limited to public perception. Retail partners are taking notice. Several major Canadian grocery chains have reduced promotional space and end cap placements for Coca-Cola products. Restaurants and cafes in urban centers are switching to alternatives, locally bottled sodas or in-house beverages that offer uniqueness and environmental credibility. The decline of Coca-Cola in Canada isn't about taste fatigue. It's about value misalignment. A sweet drink can't survive in a bitter market where trust, ethics, and identity matter more than ever. Coca-Cola's brand once said, "Open happiness." Today, many Canadians see it and think open corporate silence. The product hasn't failed, the connection has. And when a brand like Coca-Cola, the icon of American culture, begins to unravel in its closest neighboring market, it raises a bigger question. What does that say about America itself? Because if the world no longer wants the taste of Coca-Cola, then maybe it no longer wants the taste of what Coca-Cola represents. From Walmart's empty aisles to Coca-Cola's untouched cans, this isn't just a retail slump, it's a message. Canadians aren't shouting, they're walking away. And in that silence lies the true power of consumer choice. When legacy brands lose connection, trust, and meaning, they lose everything. This isn't just about Canada, it's a warning for America. Because if your closest neighbor no longer believes in what you sell, who will be next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe to Huge Battle, because this economic shift is just getting started. Walmart, once hailed as the retail heartbeat of Canada. Walmart was more than just a store, it was a way of life. With over 400 stores spread across the country, the American giant once held more than 13% of Canada's retail market share in 2020. At its peak, Walmart Canada was generating over $25 billion in annual revenue, according to Statista. It served as the go-to destination for millions of Canadian households, from single parents and university students to retirees and working-class families. But from 2023 to early 2025, that dominance has begun to erode at an alarming pace. At least Walmart locations have closed across provinces like Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. These weren't underperforming stores in major cities, they were the only full-service retail hubs in many smaller towns. Today, many of these communities are left with nothing but vacant parking lots, shuttered glass doors, and a fading store closing sign. The reason not inflation, not quality, but something far more serious, a quiet cultural rejection.
As Canadians, I think we all have to support Canada with Team Canada, and right now that means avoiding American-made products.
Across forums like Red Flag Deals and Reddit Canada, a growing grassroots movement has taken hold. Shop local, not Walmart. It's not driven by protests, but by a steady intentional shift in consumer loyalty. More and more Canadians are choosing domestic grocery chains like Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro, which saw a combined 11% revenue increase in Q4 2024, according to RBC Capital Markets. At the core of this exodus lies a growing sentiment. Walmart feels too American, too corporate, and too disconnected. Its longtime motto, everyday low prices, once sounded like a lifeline to low-income shoppers. But in today's climate, it raises ethical concerns. Are those low prices built on the backs of underpaid workers? Are they the result of squeezing suppliers, outsourcing manufacturing, or undermining smaller competitors? According to a 2024 Angus Reid poll, 62% of Canadian consumers now feel that Walmart has lost its human touch. That's a devastating shift for a brand that once positioned itself as a community ally. One poignant testimony comes from a 67-year-old woman in a small town outside Edmonton. She told CBC News, "I used to shop at Walmart every week. For 20 years, it was where I saved money. But after they closed our only store, we were left with nothing. No options, no grocery, no jobs. They came in, took profits, and left. And we're left with silence." This isn't just a retail failure, it's a failure of relationship. Walmart, once seen as part of Canadian modern life, is now viewed by many as an intruder. A global behemoth with no roots, no loyalty, and no emotional investment in the neighborhoods it serves. The problem is systemic. In the pursuit of efficiency, scale, and automation, Walmart abandoned the core values that once made it loved presence, familiarity, and community. As younger generations of Canadian shoppers prioritize ethical sourcing, environmental impact, and local economic support, Walmart's formula appears increasingly outdated. Unlike in the early 2000s when American consumer culture dominated North America, today's post-pandemic marketplace has changed. Canadians are no longer willing to trade connection for convenience or ethics for a discount. This isn't just about store closures, it's about trust, about meaning, about the feeling of walking into a store where someone knows your name, remembers your family, or simply greets you with sincerity, not a corporate script. Walmart failed to evolve in a market where consumers want relationships, not transactions, where presence matters more than price. The fall of Walmart in Canada should terrify other American brands, not because it lost a price war, but because it lost relevance. It's a lesson written in empty aisles, abandoned storefronts, and 1,000 small personal decisions made silently at checkout. A lesson that says, if you forget who you serve, they will forget you in return. And when your most loyal neighbor walks away without a protest sign, but with their wallet, that's not just decline. That's the start of a collapse. Campbell's. For decades, the familiar red and white label of Campbell's soup stood for comfort, tradition, and family warmth. On chilly Canadian evenings, a can of chicken noodle or tomato soup was more than a meal, it was a ritual. By 2019, Campbell's held over 30% of the canned soup market in Canada, according to data from NPD Group. It was an icon, woven into the fabric of daily life. But in the Canada of today, Campbell's is becoming something else entirely, an overlooked memory. Between 2023 and early 2025, Campbell's experienced an 8% drop in Canadian sales and, more significantly, a 12% loss in market share as reported by Metro Inc. The decline wasn't driven by new competitors offering lower prices. It came from a growing wave of consumers who no longer saw Campbell's as comforting but industrial, outdated, and impersonal. Walk into a Canadian supermarket and you'll see it firsthand. Shelf space once devoted to stacks of Campbell's has been reallocated to local soup brands, many of them organic, small-batch, preservative-free, and labeled with phrases like farm to jar or made in Quebec. These aren't just trendy marketing slogans, they reflect a cultural shift in how Canadians view food. This shift is driven by a generation that craves transparency, health, and connection. A 2024 survey by Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab revealed that 70% of Canadian consumers now consider ingredient transparency and sourcing origin more important than brand loyalty when buying packaged food. And that statistic is bad news for Campbell's, a brand whose recipes, supply chains, and additives have remained largely unchanged for decades. A 58-year-old school teacher in Calgary put it bluntly in a local CBC segment I used to open a can of Campbell's when I was sick or tired. But now I look at the label and can't pronounce half the ingredients. It feels more like factory food than something made for a human being. That sentiment is growing, and Campbell's hasn't kept up. While competitors have pivoted to smaller portion sizes, plant-based recipes, and plastic-free packaging, Campbell's has doubled down on mass production. The result? A product that feels stuck in time, but not in a nostalgic way, in a disconnected corporate way. This failure to adapt is especially jarring because the brand once held deep emotional value. The sound of a can opening, the steam rising from a hot bowl, the comfort of a familiar taste. These weren't just sensory experiences, they were cultural touchstones. But today that emotional connection is fading. And in a world where feelings drive purchases as much as facts, that's a fatal weakness. Even the price advantage is no longer enough. With rising income inequality and post-pandemic economic anxiety, one might expect Campbell's to thrive. But Canadians aren't just looking for cheap food, they're looking for food they can trust. And increasingly, they don't see that trust in Campbell's. The company is still profitable, still present, still recognizable. But recognition without relevance is dangerous. When a brand becomes something people remember but no longer reach for, that's the first step toward collapse. Campbell's didn't lose customers because it got worse. It lost them because it stayed the same while the world changed. And unless it reclaims the values it once stood for: simplicity, warmth, trust, it may soon become not just forgotten but obsolete.